911, please state your emergency.
I'm at Vista Heights Park, and there's a body lying on the side of the path. I don't know if she's unconscious, or...
Okay, where exactly in Vista Heights?
Just along the path, next to the street light. The guy, he's not bleeding, but he's not moving either.
Okay, I'm sending medical units to that location right away. Is there anyone else with you?
No, it's just me. The guy, he's just a kid.
Tragedy strikes every day. I think we need to call in a team of special investigators.
My name is Bradshaw. I'm a specialist in Newton's first law, and I'm the leader of the Special Investigation Unit.
My name is Zhou. I'm a co-investigator in this unit, and I'm an expert in Newton's second law.
My name is Longman Xu, investigator in training, and I'm a specialist in Newton's third law.
I'm an expert in Newton's first law, which states that unless an unbalanced external force acts upon an object, it will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line. So basically, when all the forces are balanced, the acceleration equals 0. Now, we can see here that the skateboarder started at a velocity of 0 meters per second, meaning the acceleration was 0 and there were no unbalanced forces. The only forces acting on him are in fact the normal force and the gravitational force, but since they're the same size, they balance out. Then, he started to accelerate over here by pushing his skateboard. Therefore, there'd be an unbalanced applied force pushing him forward. The forces are now unbalanced and he will move forward. Assuming friction is negligible, he then stopped pushing and cruised at constant velocity, and we can see that the forces are balanced once again as there is no more applied force. Since the forces are balanced, he will move at a constant velocity until a new unbalanced force affects him, like the victim. This is where the victim was hit. The reason why the victim was knocked all the way over here, now that's a matter for Newton's second law.
And I'm a specialist in Newton's second law. And Newton's second law states that the sum of all the forces acting on an object, aka the net force, is equal to the mass of the object times its acceleration. And so, the larger the net force, the larger the acceleration. And if the victim was initially at rest, a relatively large force is needed to quickly accelerate the victim from rest in order to propel him through the air at a fast speed and for him to land a far distance away.
If only a small force was exerted on the victim, such as the force of a baseball hitting the victim wouldn't move far because the force is smaller, resulting in less acceleration and less distance traveled. If the victim had a greater mass when hit by the skateboarder, he wouldn't have been accelerated as much since F net equals ma, and a greater mass results in less acceleration and less distance traveled as well. Therefore, the victim must have been hit with a fair amount of force, such as the force of a skateboarder exerted when colliding with another object, to have flown this far.
So that just leaves the question of, how does a skateboarder get away? And that is a matter of Newton's third law.
I happen to be an expert on Newton's third law. The third law states that when one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object exerts a force on the first object that is opposite in direction and equal in size.
In order to make his quick getaway, the skateboarder must have been pushing very hard or exerting a large force backwards on the ground. This means that the ground would have been exerting an equally large force forwards on the skateboarder, causing the skateboarder to accelerate very quickly forwards away from the crime scene. If, for example, the skateboarder pushed the ground with a small force backwards, the ground would have pushed the skateboarder with an equally small force forwards, causing him to accelerate very slowly, resulting in a pretty slow getaway. If the skateboarder pushed forwards on the ground instead, the ground would have exerted an equal force backwards on the skateboarder, causing him to accelerate backwards instead. Therefore, the skateboarder must have pushed very hard backwards, causing the ground to push the skateboarder very hard forwards, allowing him to accelerate quickly away from the crime. You may be wondering, if there is a force acting on the ground, why isn't the ground moved? Well, in fact, the ground is moved, but since the mass of the Earth is so large, we know from the second law that its acceleration would be extremely tiny, too small to detect. If instead the skateboarder applied a force on a smaller object like this bag, we can see that there is an equal force applied upon the skateboarder in the opposite direction, resulting in both objects being accelerated in opposite directions.
Now that we know how the skateboarder got away, let's head back to headquarters and break down the evidence.
Let's wrap this up. Newton's first law, unless an external unbalanced force acts on an object, it will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line. We saw this when the skateboarder was at rest, then speeding up, then when he stopped pushing.
Newton's second law states that the mass of the object times its acceleration is equal to the sum of all the forces acting on the object.
We learned about the effects of the size of the force and the mass of the object with respect to its acceleration, and we saw this in action when the skateboarder collided with the victim.
And finally, Newton's third law, which states that when one object exerts a force on a second object, the second object simultaneously exerts a force on the first object opposite in direction and equal in size. We saw this when the skateboarder was making his getaway, pushing the ground backwards as the ground pushed him forwards.
So there we have it.
Another case solved
Using Newton's three laws.
Pew!